Greetings again, this is Timur, and welcome to this webinar series about getting started with the exabyte-io platform. The goal of this webinar is to help users understand the main concepts behind the platform. And this is the first webinar in a monthly recording series. First Friday, we speak about getting started. Third Friday of the month, we speak about advanced topics. Every participant should be a registered exabyte-io user. And every participant will receive this presentation in a PDF format, so no need to take notes. It also will be recorded and made available online. If you have questions at any point during this presentation, we encourage you to ask questions by using either the chat feature of Zoom or Q&A. Okay, we'll have dedicated time to go through the questions during this webinar. Here is the agenda for today. We will be speaking first about the platform overview, its capabilities, our vision for it. And then we'll cover a bit about the core parts, what is under the hood, some user interface components that we designed, and we'll speak about the accounts and service levels. And then we'll speak in details about the entities that the platform operates with, such as material structures, simulation workflows, calculation jobs, and we'll finish with that. Okay, so let's start with the Exabyte platform and its overview. Today, there are multiple different ways that we can do the research and development activities, right? And over the last decade or so, we are speaking more and more about the data-driven science. So data-driven science really requires, it's a new paradigm. It requires new tools. It requires data-driven approach. And the goal of our platform is to facilitate this transition, the transition from the approach that is versed in computational science and modeling and simulations to the data-driven approach. The data-driven science is connected with artificial intelligence and machine learning, because once we have enough data, we can apply artificial intelligence on it to see the trends and to get insights without necessarily knowing the underlying equations, like we have to when applying computational science directly. So what is it? What do we envision the platform to be? We start with the cloud as the focal point where multiple different kinds of users can communicate, can exchange data, can collaborate. And we identify 5 different types of users, starting from the computational scientists themselves, and including experimental scientists, data scientists, IT administration, and the R&D management to see how the projects are progressing. We would have to have something that supports multi-scale simulations to make it more impactful, to have having scalable computational resources to facilitate state-of-the-art calculations, and again, supporting data as the cornerstone of what this platform is producing. And of course, last but not least, it has to be secure, so the intellectual property that is generated on this platform is not endangered. And here is how we approach building such a platform. First, we start with developing a set of open source components that together form the foundation for a fair R&D ecosystem. A fair is an established term. It stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And in order to make the platform fair, we work on data standards. The data standards that represent the main entities that the platform operates with, and such as simulation workflows, calculation jobs, materials, properties, and so on. We implement these entities in JSON schemas, which is a specific format that classifies how these entities can be stored inside a database. And in order to provide the compatibility with existing data formats, we develop a set of extractors that can extract information from simulation engines like Quantum Espresso and VASP, and transfer it, parse it into this JSON schema format that we developed. We made it on purpose open source so that other people can contribute. And we would like to make it into a community-based standard that is ever growing, open source, and available to everybody. And the last part here are applications that allow users to utilize this data formats to create and edit the entities above. Right? So one example application is a solid state materials designer. And again, it's available online on GitHub, so everybody can use it in their web projects, for example. Now, the second part of this ecosystem is the Exabyte platform itself. And the way that we envision it, the way that we're starting to develop it is by initially focusing on computational sciences, because that's the most well-known use case for us. And here, computational scientists are using their familiar tools through the cloud computing resources that we provide in this part of the diagram. And then we use extractors to store the information inside the database and just facilitate the dissemination of this information to the larger user group. Besides the computational scientists, we also envision the usage of the platform by the data scientists, so people who build data-driven approaches instead of focusing on things like computational chemistry directly, and experimental scientists who can either see the results that are produced by the computational colleagues or provide additional data points to validate and give data for data scientists. And the last part contributes in external elements. So in most cases, we see that either computational scientists or data scientists, they already have their own infrastructure, like computational resources that they use either within their team, their company, their organization that they work in. And we support a way to incorporate this infrastructure into the Exabyte platform, either through a public or a private deployment as an option. Of course, experimental scientists always have their own laboratory equipment that is entirely external to our platform today. And the same is true for people who work in data science domain. If you think about the digital materials R&D cycle, we can identify several steps or several parts that users have to undergo in order to do their work. Right? And these steps include designing material structures on the atomic level. We're speaking about atomistic modeling. Designing modeling workflows, provisioning high-performance infrastructure, controlling the calculations, collecting the data, building analytics, and then feeding experimental validation to assert veracity. And today we support 6 out of the 7 parts of this R&D cycle. Here is an example page that demonstrates how an account, an organizational account, looks inside the Exabyte platform. Here we have the entities that are available to this account, like materials, workflows, jobs. We have the users that work inside this account and their respective statuses, whether they're owners or administrators of this account. We have basic summary with the contact information, and which is available externally, so other users of the platform can contact this account if the account prefers so, and the computational infrastructure, like the storage quota and the clusters that this account has access to, the computational resources. For the design part, we support design of basic solid state geometries like supercells, combinatorial sets, surfaces, and such. We also support the creation of material sets, as we call them, where people can code in chemical reactions. So for something like a managed elastic band calculation, where we have the initial position for the atom and the final along the path. And once the structures are created, we support, we allow users to set up the simulations and assign a specific kind of workflow to extract the property from that structure. And again, these workflows are organized in the database we have a set of template workflows that I will cover, and users can design their own workflows using our platform tools. These workflows also include the computational parameters inside themselves, and users can be notified about the calculations, about the jobs as they proceed. So here is a job that we just created by combining a certain workflow and applying it, combining it with a particular material structure. Now, the next step is to execute this job. And for that, we provide the computational resources, a way to track the workflow execution to see how it progresses. And at the end, we provide the results. These results are presented to the user, and they're also stored in a database so that we can come back and run some sort of data analytics on it, whether it's a band structure or just a number like a total energy calculation or a chemical reaction path. We can extract this information using programmatic means like Python scripts. And moreover, we can also create a material so we can run the calculations, again, using the RESTful API and its Python client today. So we can import materials from a third-party database or from disk and then run calculations, wait for them to finish, as I'm demonstrating here in this video, and then extract the data points from the calculation, like the structural parameters and the results, like the band gaps in this video. When it's useful when building some sort of data analytics and machine learning approaches. And for that, we also have support for Jupyter Notebook, natively incorporated into the platform, so users can edit and run Jupyter Notebooks. Here's an example of how we can communicate with our RESTful API by providing the account ID and an authentication token. So from the Jupyter Notebook that is running inside the platform, we can communicate and get a list of materials, like in this case, from the database of the calculations that we ran before. Okay, so in this case, I'm getting all materials that have silicon inside their formula, and this is how it works. There is a set of applications that we support today, mostly at the level of density functional theory and molecular dynamics. Here's the full list. And there's a set of analysis tools that we have installed. This is a relatively quick procedure for us, so if there's any other tools that you would require, we can install them relatively quickly. And we obviously support the execution of scripting applications like Python and Shell and Jupyter. These applications are also available through command line. There are multiple access scenarios, including remote desktop, including command line access, including the web application access, obviously. And users familiar with the way the batch scripting resource management works can also utilize that model on our platform. This is a quick example. So we can connect through the web terminal or through any terminal client, edit the job PBS script for a particular calculation, adjust all the necessary parameters, and then submit it through our platform. Okay, so I'm coming to the summary of the first part of my presentation. Exabyte-io is a comprehensive ecosystem for materials and chemicals R&D. The goal of the ecosystem is to transition today's prevalent isolated and siloed approach to data, to computational materials data, to a findable, accessible, interoperable infrastructure, and make it ready for the data-driven science. The goal of the platform is also to supercharge computational scientists by providing a dedicated environment to organize and accelerate their work and connect it with the work of data scientists. The platform can be accessed on multiple levels: infrastructure for computational only, programmatic levels like RESTful API and command line, and through the web interface. Now, let's speak a little bit about the core parts and what we have under the hood. I demonstrated this diagram that shows the key components of the platform, and here is our GitHub page. And you can see that to each component here, to each diagram part, there is a corresponding repository that we have in open source. For example, the data standards are summarized inside the repository that we call SE, which stands for exabyte source of schemas and examples. And then for extractors, we have an example implemented in exaparser. For the applications, we have an example materials designer. And the RESTful API and examples of working with the RESTful API are also present. It's important to understand how we think about the different entities that the platform works with, right? We identify material structures, simulation workflows, jobs, materials properties. And the reason why we separate them, the reason why we identify them and separate materials information from the workflow information is to be able to cover multiple different model types, multiple different material types, and to be able to deal with the complexity of computational material science. It's extremely diverse, and by having a very clear delineation and separating these different entities, we will be able to cover this diversity. So if you look at the data structures that represent the entities, if you look at SE in more details, we'll see that the data structures are based on JSON schemas, JavaScript object notation. Data structures are organized as schemas that define the data component relations. So if we would go and navigate into the schema folder here, we will see which properties are supposed to be present inside the data structure for it to adhere to the schema. And we understand that this repository in the future, as we develop the platform, as other people contribute, will likely be used in a web application domain, something that is related to the web infrastructure. So we made it on purpose to be a reusable Python and JavaScript packages, both for Python and for JavaScript. So people can clone this repository or install it as a Python package and then validate the data that they produce internally by running a couple of quick functions that we support. So here is an example material schema. It contains properties such as material formula, its crystal basis, crystal lattice, and a set of derived properties. And here is an example that adheres to the schema, a material that has basis with 2 atoms present inside it. And we track the coordinates for these atoms and their corresponding elements. Right, so this is an FSC silicon, and this is how an example that is adhering to the schema looks like. Now, why it is important to understand the schemas and what we store underneath the data structures, inside the data structures. It's important to know that to be able to operate with the data directly through RESTful API, or for example, through the advanced functionality that the platform provides. So if you look at the list of materials inside the platform and click expand, use expand option on one of the materials, we'll be able to see the full data structure, and we'll be able to add some, use some additional information on top of what is given in the list by default. So every entity that user encounters inside the platform is defined inside the exabyte data convention, which is available as an open source GitHub repository. These definitions are meant as a unified format to incorporate data from multiple different material types and modeling approaches. And again, the platform provides a user interface to work with the data directly, as well as the default web infrastructure. Users that are familiar with software development in JavaScript or in Python, we encourage them to contribute their functionality. So here is an example pull request from one of our partners inside Materials Designer repository. So they have developed additional functionality, and they put a pull request that we have reviewed and then can incorporate into the main package and then deploy as part of the exabyte platform. So this is a way to develop new functionality and make it available to all the other platform users. Okay, now let's speak a little about the user interface and its main components. Here is the general user interface. Here's how it looks like from the user standpoint. It has 5 main components. The platform has the header at the top. It has the left-hand sidebar, right-hand sidebar, support widget, and the footer at the bottom. And let's start with the support widget, because that is likely the most important component for the people who are just starting. They want to ask questions, they want to get support. And here's how they do that. They click on the support widget, and they open this form and provide additional information about the nature of the problem that they're facing. Excuse me. We really encourage users to submit at least a screenshot, even better a screencast, so that we can understand the problem that they're facing better, because sometimes we have to dig a little deeper to understand what's happening, and having this additional context really helps. Now, there is another chat available for the users while they're registering or considering working with the platform. And we discourage its use for logged in users. We only suggest that the people who are not yet registered in the platform ask questions about the registration process through this chat. Now, the second component, excuse me. The second component I want to speak about is the left-hand sidebar. And to open it, we have to click on the sidebar trigger here in the left top corner. And inside the left-hand sidebar, we'll see the entities that belong to this account, such as materials, jobs, and workflows again. And it has shortcuts to other platform functionality, like the bank collections, seeing other accounts, seeing entities that are shared with this account. The third component I wanted to mention is the right-hand sidebar, and we can open it by clicking on the name of the account in the top right corner. And here we have the account preferences, the billing information, and the alternative connection methods like the web terminal and the remote desktop. There are also, besides the general components, there are also entity-specific interface components. So for every material, for every workflow, we have Materials Explorer, Materials Designer, and Materials Viewer. And Explorer essentially is just a list that lists the entities that belong to this account. And we can see the basic properties of these entities, and we can interact with them. Excuse me. So there are a set of actions that are available at the top of the Materials Explorer or Workflows Explorer, for example. These actions at the top can be applied to multiple entities in the list, multiple entries, and there are actions per each entity, per each entry that are available here through a dropdown. We can also filter the items by using the filter above, and for some of the items we have the advanced filter functionality like the Materials Advanced Search. The designer user interface component allows us to edit the information to create new entities. And again, this is how a materials designer component looks like. We have the header menu, the list of items, crystallographic data panel, 3D view of the material. I will cover this a little more in details later today. And the last component, the viewer, allows us to view the information, but not edit it. We can only edit the metadata associated with this entity in order to preserve its consistency. So if we have a material, we wouldn't be able to modify its structural parameters because those are defining a material, but we will be able to add a new tag to it or change the name, for example, if required. Now let's speak a little about the accounts and sharing. The accounts are owning and performing actions on entities. So accounts define different ways that users interact with the platform. the accounts have members, so users, humans, and they could be organizational, they could be team accounts, and of course there are personal accounts. For personal accounts, they only have one member, the person themselves. For organizational accounts, we have multiple members that can have different type of permissions associated with them. For example, the account owner, the organization owner, has all the permissions available. Account administrators have also elevated set of permissions. Account members by default can only read the entities but not edit, for example. So this is a way that we can facilitate the shared access to entities and secure collaboration. So by default, no other people but the people that are involved in the account can see the entities until they're shared directly with other accounts inside the platform. It's important also to understand the entity bank concept that we have implemented. So initially, all the entities are stored inside the entity collection, and they are private to each account. So when a new account is created, we create an entity that it owns. So for example, upon creation, every account has silicon as the material that is associated with this account. So every account in the account collection has silicon as the material. Of course, it would lead to a duplication, and we needed a way to track only the unique materials that are present inside this entity collection. And we do so by having the entity bank collection. The bank collection only contains unique entities, so for multiple versions of silicon owned by different accounts, in this case, we'll have one entry inside the materials bank. Now, there is an option to have the private data enabled for an account. And in that case, any entity that is created inside the bank as a copy of the collection entity will not be accessible by any other account. So there will be direct mapping between these two entities, and no other account will be able to see this one inside the bank. When there is no private data access enabled, all other accounts are able to see the entities, and this is a way for us to facilitate the dissemination of the data that data share. In order to use the bank functionality, users can click on this button inside the workflows list, for example, and access the entities that are stored inside the materials or workflows bank. And this is a good way to start with running simulations by reusing the workflows that are already present in the workflows bank. So if we look at the workflows here, we'll see that there are multiple of them that already support things like GW calculations. And some of them are produced by the curator's account. The curator's account is the account that has well-tested workflows from the exabyte team and our near circle. So we suggest that you start initially by importing the workflows produced by the curator's account and then adjusting them according to your preference. Now, the platform that we work with provides multiple different service levels. Service levels that define the features that are available to the accounts. And we have 4 different service levels as of today. Each of them serves a different purpose. So initially, all accounts start with the free service level to test the functionality. And then if they want to, they can migrate to having a pro level, which is meant for individual users to prototype calculations on their own, to run calculations on their own. If they want to work together with someone else, with other people on their team, they can subscribe for a team account. And for larger teams, for larger calculation usage, we suggest using the enterprise accounts. And there are obviously features, the platform features that are different for each of the service levels. For example, things like support severity, availability of the private data, the number of account members, and other things. Okay, so let me summarize with the second section. We have developed the data standards that define the entities, the concept that the platform works with. And our goal is to make these data standards to be a unified format supporting multiple different simulation approaches like density functional theory, molecular dynamics, and so on. And we provide a user interface to work with these entities and alternative access options. The accounts can perform actions on the entities inside the platform in a shared access way. And the features that are available to the accounts are defined by their current service levels, from free to enterprise. Okay, I think I'm halfway through this presentation. Let's see if you have any questions as of right now. No questions yet, so let's continue on with this presentation. Now let's speak a little bit more in details about materials and the actions that we can perform on them and the user interface components. So here is a list of materials inside an account. And initially, the first thing that we would like to do is to upload some materials data. Quite likely, you're already working with some materials on your laptop, on your computer. And to be able to upload this materials information, we need to click on this upload option in the top, in the list of actions. And this is a dialog that will allow us to select additional files. So we click on select items. We select one or multiple files from disk. Here I'm having 3 postcard files that I'm uploading at the same time. Now there is a way to view the original file content, and there is a way to assign metadata to these entries. So here I will assign 2 tags to entry number 1. And as we see, the tags are shown inside this dialog. Now, this is a preliminary dialog. So I can only view the actual files that I'm preparing for the upload. And then I can select all the files and click on upload to actually send the information to the platform database. Now, when I see the green notification at the bottom, it means that the materials information was successfully uploaded. And here I see the new 3 entries at the top of the list, one of which contains the desired tags. Okay, so I can search by using these tags later on inside this filter window, the filter component. The second option is to import materials information from an online database. We support materials project, and in order to use this functionality, you have to click on the import button at the top and then search for a material formula, for example. So here I'm searching for magnesium oxide. And as you can see, the rest of the procedure is equivalent. I have to select this entry and click on import, wait for it to finish, and there I can see this new entry present inside my account collection items. If I open it, navigating to this materials page, here's the viewer component. I can see its 3D representation and the structural information and some metadata associated with this material. Now, the third option is to use the materials bank. So as more and more people join our platform, we see more materials present inside the bank. And the likelihood is that someone already worked with material that is close to the one that you have interest in. So in order to access materials bank, we need to open the left-hand sidebar, click on bank and then materials. And just like in the previous example, we will search for a particular material by its formula and then select the entry in the list and click copy so that we can copy the entry from materials bank to our private collection. Once the notification has been shown, it means that our account now has the corresponding entry in the materials list. Okay, so that's how we import materials information either from disk or from third-party online database, or by reusing the information available in the platform before. Now, the same functionality is available for workflows. We can reuse the workflows previously created in the platform. And for that, we have a dedicated option, import from bank at the top. In some cases, we need to have a more fine-grained search functionality, especially as the list of materials grows. For example, here I have over 4,000 material structures, and I need to understand how to find a specific structure of interest, right, without browsing all 4,000. For that, we have implemented the advanced search functionality. So if we click on the advanced search action at the top, we can construct a query with multiple and or conditions. So here I'm constructing a query that will search all materials that contain aluminum in its formula, and all that has its cell volume less than 80 angstrom cubed. So we measure it in angstroms. And materials that have high pressure inside its metadata tags. And here we go. We only have one material that adheres to all of these criteria, and that's how we can narrow down the list. Okay. It's useful to tag materials in a certain way. And then when we set up the calculations, we can search by materials that have this tag and then select multiple materials at once during the job creation, for example. Now, when we want to create new material, or when we want to modify the structure of it, we have to open the materials designer. To do that, we click on the create button, this plus button in the list of actions. And this is how it looks. Again, this is the materials designer, the four main components, the header menu at the top with the menu items, the list of materials that are present inside this materials designer session is in the left. The crystallographic data panel is in the middle, and then the 3D interactive representation is on the right side of it. I will only demonstrate one example usage pattern. So here we will import a material from our account collection. So the materials that we either have uploaded or imported from a third-party database, for example, we now can import and reuse inside the materials designer. So here are materials owned by my account. Now I'm using one of them to make it available inside this materials designer session. So by default, the session opens with the default material, which is silicon FCC in this case. I don't need it, so I would go and remove it from the session. It only removes it from the current materials designer session. It doesn't affect the entry in a database. But if you modify this entry directly, there is a way to modify the entry, the corresponding entry in the database too. Okay, so the functionality that we have inside materials designer is quite a bit more comprehensive, but it's a subject for another discussion. Now let's talk about the workflows. And just like with materials, we can import and copy a workflow item from the workflows bank. To do that, again, we open the left-hand sidebar, navigate to bank, and click on workflows. And we search for the property that we want to extract, or we can search by the application name, Quantum Espresso, for example. And then we select the entry and click copy to copy this workflow into our account collection. Now then, after we have copied this workflow, we need to understand how to modify it, how to adjust it. And for that, we have to understand the underlying structure that we use, the underlying concept that we use to represent the logic that is involved inside this simulation workflow. The logic can be understood by representing it as a flowchart. And a flowchart that has a hierarchy including sub-workflows and units. So the green box here is a workflow, and then it has two sub-workflows, and each sub-workflow has multiple units that are executed in a certain succession. We did this on purpose to be able to have this modular structure where sub-workflows can only contain one model and one particular method implementing this model. For example, each sub-workflow has to be specific to a certain simulation engine, like Quantum Espresso or WASP. And by having that, we have a robust way to search through this functionality in the future when we store it in a database. Each unit is an elementary calculation, so there is no further subdivision beyond having different units. And it's executed in a certain succession based on the logic inside the workflow. There are multiple different kinds of units, like there are units that can represent if-else conditions or map and reduce. Units have different types in terms of how they pertain to the executables. So each unit's execution unit in particular can have executables associated with it and a particular flavor of that executable. For example, when we deal with Quantum Espresso, we use pw.x as an executable. And there are certain default templates that we assign the units when dealing with specific flavors of the calculations for this executable. So when we deal with the self-consistent field calculation, we have a template for that input file. And when we deal with non-self-consistent field calculation, we have another template, and so on. So this functionality, this approach allows us to reuse the templating, reuse the data that we assign for a particular executable or flavor, and move it from one sub-workflow to another. Here is the user interface for the workflow designer. Again, it also has the header component. It has the list of sub-workflows in the left and the sub-workflow editor in the right. So let me demonstrate how we can add or remove a sub-workflow from a workflow. So here we have a workflow with one sub-workflow, and we click on the plus button to add another one. And we select append to current, so it's added after the original one. Okay, and we can also remove this newly added sub-workflow by clicking minus. The sub-workflow editor, again, has multiple components to itself. There's this actions menu at the top. There's the editor tabs that can help us set certain sub-workflow parameters. And then there is a units flowchart that shows the units and how they are connected to each other for this sub-workflow. And if we zoom in on this particular flowchart, we'll see that it shows the type of the unit. So E means execution in this case, execution unit as opposed to a conditional, for example. And if you click on one of them, we'll be able to open its detailed view. But before doing that, let's see what this units flowchart actually represents. So if we unwind the logic included inside this rudimentary representation, we'll actually see a convergence workflow like this, where we set up the initial parameter, and then we run the PWSCF calculation, and then we have a conditional check. So this is the C is a condition where we check for whether the threshold was obtained. And if it wasn't, we redo this calculation again and again. When we open the units editor, we see a specific application section, the property section, the monitor section, and the input templates that pertain to this particular unit. When we open the input templates, we can see the context that is present inside this template with a set of input variables. We use Ginger as the templating engine, and we populate this template variables based on the data that comes from the database, and it contains the data about material and workflow combined together. For example, if we look at the specific keyword here, abrupt, we can see that abrupt is a quantum espresso specific keyword that is populated based on the materials information like this, right? And this is the first render. So to be able to see the, to preview the textual content of this file, we have to click the preview tab, and then we will be able to see the actual structural parameters for the material that we preview this template with. Now, when we send it over to the computational cluster, to the computational infrastructure, you can see that we still have some variables not substituted. And that's because there is really no reason for the user to know which job directory this calculation will be running in. And we substitute that on the computational infrastructure. So this is the first render on the web. The second render happens during the execution time. And it's because of that second render functionality, we are also able to do things like convergence and looping and substituting, editing the templates during the calculation. Okay, now I have approached the last part of my presentation, and I'll speak about the jobs, these simulations. Before we start, it's important to note that before executing any simulations, we have to create, import, or upload the desired materials, as I demonstrated. We have to create the desired workflows, and we have to assert that the account has enough balance to perform the calculation, has enough disk space, disk quota to perform this calculation. And then we need to navigate to the desired project, which is the collection of jobs. We organize jobs into projects. As you can see, it's one of the items present in the user interface. If we just want to select the default project, we can click on the Create Job shortcut in the left-hand sidebar. When we do that, we are presented with the Job Designer. And Job Designer has four basic components, four main components, the header menu at the top, and the Materials, Workflows, and Compute tabs. In the Materials tab, we can select Materials by clicking on the three dots in the header and clicking Select Materials. We can see now and access our account entity collection. We can select multiple materials in the list and then click Select Items. And now all 6 of these materials that we have selected are present inside the Job Designer session. You can see at the top, we also have the formula variable appearing. We didn't have it before, now we have it because we have multiple materials. And the formula will be substituted upon the creation of the job. So for each of these materials, we'll have a separate job, and it will contain the corresponding material formula. The second step is to select a single workflow. Unlike materials, the workflows have to be single. So here we select the phonon density of state workflow, and we verify that this is indeed the workflow that we want to use. And the third step is to select the computational infrastructure, the computational parameters for the workflow in question. And this is a sophisticated issue of its own. What's important to understand there is that users have to indicate the time limit, the maximum time for which the job will run for. In some cases, the calculations can be quite lengthy, and we want to make sure that users limit the time, the maximum time, in order to not to overspend on this particular job. The clusters, the computational infrastructure available from different cloud providers can be selected here. The resource management queue, the number of cores, processors available to this job. The notification parameters are all present inside this computational parameters for. Now, when we have all of that set up, we can click on the Save button in the top, the checkbox. And this is how we create a job. There are a couple of notes about the job creation. First of all, we have made it on purpose so that users cannot modify the workflows during the job creation. We did it to simplify the user interface and to assert the data consistency. The second is the most important reason. The users should modify and edit workflows first, as I demonstrated with the workflows editor, and then select the modified workflow during the job creation. The unit input preview allows the users to directly modify the input file inside the job designer. But it should be avoided for consistency because there is no way for us to verify at present that you are actually using the material that is associated with the job and the other metadata that are present inside the workflow, for example. Multiple materials can be selected for high throughput job creation or for multi-material. You can think about NAB, for example, calculations in this case. There is also a way to span other jobs and wait for their execution when we create jobs in the jobs designer, but this is a separate topic. Now, when we have created the job, it will look something like this. It will have the P, this bright blue status, which stands for pre-submission. The pre-submission status is shown in cyan and this bright blue color. And then we can select this job and submit it, click run, and it subsequently will change its status to S, which means submitted. And after a while, it will change its status to A, which means active. So the active jobs are shown in orange, and we can see the wait time and the runtime also present inside this entry. So this job was waiting in the queue for 1 second, and now it has been executed for 8 seconds, and it's still running, which is what the plus means. Now, if we navigate into a running job, excuse me, we can see how it's progressing. We can see the currently active unit. We can see its output and some of the charts that visualize the convergence in this case. They are dynamically updated as the calculation is progressing. And when the units are finishing, they are also colored differently. So the green colored unit is the one that has successfully finished. And now the second unit is active. When the calculation finishes itself, when the job is finished, its status is changed to F, which means finished, and it is shown in green color. But when we navigate to the finished job, we can see it has 2 extra tabs, results and files. When we go to the results tab, we can see the results like the pen structure in this case. And when we go to the files tab, we can see all the files that have been generated during this calculation. These files are available on the web. You can copy the links for these files and access them from programmatically, for example. Okay.